Hi everybody, welcome to this next video from the Wisconsin First Detector Network. Today we're joined by Adrian Barta from the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection here in Madison, and he's going to tell us about efforts to eradicate common barberry in Wisconsin.
Just a brief history of the common barberry eradication in Wisconsin. It was an extensive project that went on for a long time. So before it gets lost in history, we'd like to talk about it a little more. A little bit of background. Stem rust is historically the most destructive pest of small grains. Dating all the way back to the Roman days, stem rust had been a problem. And in 1916, there was an epidemic of stem rust that cut wheat yields dramatically. This, of course, was in the middle of the Great War, so it was a particular concern. Tied to common barberry is, of course, that common barberry is the alternate host of stem rust. It's where the sexual reproduction takes place of the fungus and where new races arise. It also provides an early inoculum source in the spring. So in 1918, the War Emergency Board of American Plant Pathologists was formed, got together to figure out what they could do to help protect the food supply. One of the things that they settled on was an effort to eradicate the common barberry throughout the upper Midwest primarily. The rationale for that was, as I said, the early inoculum source, the likelihood of new races arising, though that wasn't entirely understood in 1918, but doing so would increase the lifespan of wheat varieties because the resistance genes would last longer. There were a couple of problems with this. Barberry was actually a well-liked plant that settlers had brought with them and planted in abundance around their farmsteads, around their houses. It had many uses, wine and jam and dye and others, not to mention winter color. So before the eradication effort could really take off, it required an effort to demonize both the barberry and the black stem rust. And we had an opportunity where we see images like this, the rust moving from the barberry to the wheat field. Again, it was 1918, so we had the Great War, the barberry is the kin of the Kaiser. The Soviet Revolution was going on, so you see the red-handed anarchist of the grain fields. We just don't see this kind of imaging in invasive species anymore. In some ways that's probably good, but again, the warning or the help, again, the demonic stem rust attacking the wheat. Thieves, and then there's the always popular threat of alien enemies. So you can see that the imaging went quite a ways at attacking the common barberry. The other way, of course, to enlist the public is to enlist the children. And there was a program with the National Rust Busters Club, where if you were a child, a school child, and you reported a common barberry, you earned yourself a Rust Busters medal. And you can see these proud Rust Busters here, gathered together with their medals. And again, these guys don't look quite so happy, but they're wearing their medals. This is from about 1918, 1919. So the program ran from 1918, was sort of wound down in 1976 throughout the upper Midwest. As I said, cooperative program between the USDA and the states. Crews actually went door to door, house to house, farm to farm, searching for common barberry. Went through the woods, through pretty much all of Wisconsin, particularly southern Wisconsin. I talked to one farmer who said his uncle was still mad about it because after the crews left, the barberry was gone, but so was the ginseng. I don't know if that's true, but that was the story. So, at every positive site, the crews filled out what's a Form L. And I don't know if this is actually the 12th form the USDA ever came up with, where the L comes from or not, but it was certainly an early one. And they would fill out the form, the date, the number of bushes, the location, obviously. This is the St. Charles Home for Boys. They would draw a map, and then they would go back every couple of years until they had several consecutive years of no fines. The other thing that they included was the attitude of the owner, which I think is interesting. There was a legal backdrop for this. I think generally that was rare that it required the legal response. But at every location, they filled one of these out. I include this one because this is the DNR Fish Hatchery location on Fish Hatchery Road in Madison. Forest Health Lab is there, so I just like to let them know they need to keep checking, but I think we're okay. In 1934, by 1934, the program had grown to 350 people working on barberry eradication in Wisconsin. Minnesota had 450 people. I think this is, of course, a CCC or WPA effort during the Depression, but there were a lot of people engaged in this work for a lot of years. So the upshot was that 18,442 properties in Wisconsin were found to have barberries, and we still have those Form L records. This was the home of August Derleth, the author from Sauk City, the Luder sisters in 1932, but you can see that the crews were there in 32 and 37 and 41 and 46 and 62 and 78, continuing to follow up for a lot of years on properties that had barberry. So it was a huge effort of mine. Here's a map of Madison, downtown Madison, the area around the square, the Arboretum, the campus, Picnic Point. You can see the locations where barberries were found. Also in the records, we have things like the S.C. Johnson family home in Racine, the Yawkey House, which is now the museum in Wausau. Almost every county courthouse in the state seemed to have barberries around it. So the response was, when they found them, originally they would dig them to remove them. But they soon realized that A, digging was a lot of work and left a lot of root pieces in the ground from which they got resprouting. So they went to Plan B, which was, back in 1918, salt. About 10 pounds for the average sized bush was the recommendation. And you can see the rock salt poured around it. The old timers would say that you could tell for decades where the bushes had been, because the deer would be digging at the soil to get the salt. So it took a lot of salt. This one in particular we found, they had about 3,000 bushes initially. The initial application in 1921 was 7 tons of salt. They came back in 33 with, just a measly 725 pounds. But in 37, they brought another ton. In, I think, 41, they brought another ton. In about the 50s, they went to amite. But after putting, 5 or 6 tons of salt on this farm, in 1977, the attitude of the owner was uncooperative. So that's kind of not much of a surprise. Huge effort over the years. So according to the records, if the counts on the Form Ls are to be believed, 5,782,536 barberry bushes were found and destroyed. Nationally or regionally, the program was started to wind down in 1976 and officially terminated completely in 1980. Over that time, though, the estimate is that more than 500 million barberries were destroyed across this area of the upper Midwest. So the question is it still a concern after all that time? There is a new race of stem rust in North Africa, 1999. Hasn't been found here yet, nor has any new really serious race arisen, but it's entirely possible that either one could happen. So because we have the possession of these Form L data and we still have an interest in the wheat, we have tried to look at some of the historical sites. And of course, it's kind of a low priority project for us, but it's a good winter project. We've been to about 200 sites, and of those sites, we've found 5 that have common barberry still present after all the efforts. We don't know if the 2.5% of the sites is representative, but if it is, that would be about 460 places in the state that still have common barberry. Whether it can outcompete the honeysuckle and the buckthorn is another question. But overall, the general results of the barberry eradication program would indicate that it was fairly successful, and certainly the races of stem rust on wheat have remained fairly stable for a number of decades. So there's some indication that there was some success, and so we want to be on guard against it coming back, perhaps. Recently, we were given some new tools. A Washington State USDA joint project tried to collect all the Form L data, all the Form L forms from the states that still had them. Take a picture of everyone, a digital picture of everyone, and geocode them all so that we could use the data electronically and in some other ways. We have a shapefile of locations we got back from them with 52 counties in the state. I don't know that they're going to be able to finish. I think they've run out of money. But we've got a good part of the state done. So 9,835 locations were geocoded in a shapefile with the original count, the number of resurvey efforts, and the like. So we can now prioritize our surveys a little better. We can look at sites that had a number of resurvey visits or the number of bushes. We can calculate density per township. Here are sites with 500 or more bushes in their original discovery. And here are some of those with proximity to wheat on a regular basis. So we can take a look at the wheat and keep an eye on that. We are, after all, the Department of Agriculture, and so the wheat is our main concern. The barberries are an interesting piece of that puzzle. But we can go back and look now that we have some of this data. So that'll be winters to come. One final sort of note that I always like to throw out when I talk about this data, and I've just put this out for people. This is a Form L that's kind of randomly pulled out of the collection from 1929. It is perfectly accessible. We could go there tomorrow. We have the map, we have the directions. The question that we always have to ask is, which of our records are going to be accessible in 85 or 86 or 87 years from now? So there is something to be said for paper and paper copies. And with that, if there are any questions, my contact information is here. Feel free to contact me. Otherwise, thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot, Adrian. I think this is a really interesting story of clearly a massive effort to eradicate this problematic plant. I don't know that we have a similar effort underway for other species at this point. A lot of our volunteers tend to work more in natural areas, and common barberry does have some ecological impacts as well, but I'm wondering if people are finding common barberry that have naturalized in local parks or woodlands, would DATCP want to know about these plants?
Yes, we very definitely would. We've worked through some of the herbarium records and the like to try to capture some of those outside of this program. But we certainly would like to know about any common barberry. We find a lot of Japanese barberry sites, I'm sure, but anything with common barberry would be of particular interest to us.
Great. And for WIFTN volunteers that are watching, of course, you do not need to use a Form L to report the common barberry. You can report common barberry just like you would any other invasive. It is part of the GLEDN app, or you can always send an email to WIFTN and we can pass it on to Adrian and folks at DATCP. So definitely keep a lookout for it. Adrian, do you have any tips for identifying common barberry or any resources you can point people to?
There is quite a bit online, but generally the three thorns and the toothed leaf, I think, will help you to separate it from the other barberries. So,
great.
And the berries in bunches.
Right. So if you're familiar with Japanese barberry, which is planted in many, many yards, the common barberry leaves are about the same shape, but with teeth on them. And instead of a single spine below the leaves, you'll see a group of 3 spines. So.
We found that the easiest time to find it is often in the winter when leaves are off. You can see the berries at some distance when you generally can't see through the honeysuckle leaves in other times.
Set yourself up for a survey project next winter. From DATCP's perspective, are there species today where you have a similarly massive effort as what had happened with common barberry in the past?
No, nothing of that concern. Again, from the ag perspective, it was the wheat component, I think, that sparked it. But I don't know that we'll see that kind of an effort again in our lifetime or anyone else's.
This is a really interesting story that a lot of folks in Wisconsin probably haven't heard about, but it's clearly an interesting piece of the history in our state, kind of bridging the gap between what can happen in our natural areas with invasive species and how it also impacts our agricultural areas. Thanks again, Adrian, for coming in and sharing this story with us, and we hope that it will live on now.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for watching this video from the Wisconsin First Detector Network. To learn more about our network or to access additional information about invasive species in Wisconsin, please visit our website or contact us.